Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today for a very special edition here with friend Julia Boorstin, who just wrote an incredible book. I was fortunate enough to go to a dinner where we got to have an intimate discussion about it. So I couldn't be more thrilled to share it with all of you as founders because we talked about the incredibly important topic that I think all of us struggle with, and that's when women lead. So I'm going to actually read her bio really quickly, but just as a quick reminder, I'm Allie Wyatt, co-founder and CEO of Female Founder Collective. We have our 10th house, which is our private community for founders looking to connect with each other by stage, industry, geography. We're going to talk about the importance of community in this conversation, which Julia has actually a lot of great stats on. So can't wait to hear about those. But as far as our cohort goes, we actually have 4 cohorts per year now. We used to do it on a rolling basis. Our one is closing on 10/21, so that's next week, coming very soon. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into Julia because she has a very big schedule, which we're super excited for. But she is CNBC's senior media and tech correspondent, delivering reporting, CEO interviews, and analysis with a featured role on TechCheck. And in 2013, Boorstin created the CNBC Disruptor 50 list of private companies transforming the economy. She also leads the network's Closing the Gap initiative. And Boorstin is now obviously the author of When Women Lead, What They Achieve, Why They Succeed, and How We Can Learn from Them, from Avid Reader Press. It weaves together the stories of 60 female leaders with research explaining the strategies behind their success. It was released on October 11th. So this week, crazy. And you were just on the Today Show. I want to hear first, what inspired you to write this? You obviously have met with and gotten to know so many incredible leaders, but would love to hear sort of the origin of this book.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I apologize for my crazy background. I'm in 30 Rock right now. I'm in New York at 30 Rock, and I'm about to do something for NBC News now and then MSNBC later. So I was like, give me a room. So this is the large fluorescent lights behind me. I'll block it with my book. I have interviewed so many CEOs in my 20 plus years as a business journalist. I've been at CNBC for 16 years and at Fortune magazine for 6 years before that. And I obviously always noticed that the women were in the minority. They were the exceptions. And in the past, maybe 5 years or so, I started seeing more and more female leaders, especially in the startup space. As you know, like change happens really slowly in big companies. Right now, just about 8.5% of the Fortune 500 has a female CEO. But for the Disruptor 50 list, I was meeting these amazing women who were creating these crazy companies, changing businesses, really transforming industries. And I was so impressed by them. And I was also at the same time looking at some stats that you all probably know well, namely that female founders last year got 2% of all venture capital funding. Male-only teams got 82%. So about 15.5% went to co-ed teams. But that fact that like over the past decade, female founders were getting 3% of venture capital funding. I was like, this is, first of all, it's bananas. Second of all, the women who do succeed are not just exceptions, they're really exceptional. And I wanted to tell their stories because I was really inspired by them. And I found myself asking them questions like, how did you do it? How did you not get discouraged by so much rejection? I knew that they would have lessons that would be valuable for me. But then the more I dug into their stories, I realized that these are leadership lessons that are universally valuable for everyone.
I totally agree with that. And the amazing thing is too, is not only with female founders, but you've also for years been interviewing some of the biggest leaders out there, particularly female. So Katrina Lake, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jenn Hyman, Whitney Wolfe Herd, Lena Waithe, Shivani Siroya, Julia Collins. Were there any sort of really big surprises that you found in the process of writing this book? I'm sure there were lots, but
there were so many surprises. I mean, one thing that was interesting is I sort of started with the interviews because I was like, these stories are amazing. Everyone needs to hear these stories. And also I think there's this like stereotype of what a leader looks like, right? There's this stereotype that leaders are white men and that's it. And I knew in my experience that totally wasn't true. So I wanted to to tell their stories. But I think what was really surprising to me was to go from the stories to the research. I realized that as a woman writing a book about how awesome female founders are, that I could face a lot of criticism for being a fluffy thing and not having a strong argument. And I really dug into the research. And it's interesting because like this is a thick book. This is a very long book. I have 40 pages of endnotes. And people have asked me this week since the book came out, like, why did you decide to make it so data driven? Like, why did you read 300 studies and include all these statistics? And I was like, look, like, I want to, first of all, I want to be taken seriously, but I want you guys to be taken seriously, or I say you women to be taken seriously. And I feel like what was fascinating, what was most surprising to me was to go from the stories to the research to try to understand why these strategies that these women were using were so effective. And then I found study after study after study showing that female leadership is more effective, higher returns, faster path to profitability, and that these characteristics that women tend to lead with, whether it's empathy or vulnerability, is actually, they're just better leadership styles, and men should be leading with them as well. So I think the overwhelming takeaway is that the data supports female leadership and diversity in leadership. And there's such a massive gap between the reality of what the data shows and actually where the money is going. And to me, just the fact that I kept on finding study and that would lead to another study. And then another study came out last week showing that female-led companies in the S&P 500, 87% of them perform better than the average, study after study. And I'm like, there is a disconnect. And I don't know if that disconnect is because people aren't aware of how much better these female-led companies are performing. Like maybe people just don't know the numbers, but I feel like this idea that the numbers mean that people should be investing more in women and in people of color. Period.
I love that. And I think it's so important that you've taken data because as you mentioned, it's very hard to argue with hard fact. And also I think with men, it tends to be easier to digest when you say this is a good business decision. This isn't about sort of what we think should be the ideal or reality. It's just that this works, right? It's
totally
effective.
Yeah. So I would say that was the overarching surprise, but there were so many amazing stories and stats and combinations of stories and research inside this.
Well, one of the other key findings, which I personally really love, and I think everybody in our community will love, is that community and network are some of the biggest indicators for long-term success for women. This feels, obvious to me, but what are some of the best places for women to expand their network? And can you kind of elaborate on what you found as it related to networks?
So this was also surprising to me, but in a way really rang true. So obviously, I feel great when I get together with my girlfriends or when I go to a dinner with a new group of women and I meet new women. I always feel inspired and energized. And I just sort of felt like that was like a personal thing. Like I'm an extrovert. I love meeting new people, but especially women are so inspiring to me. But then I dug into the data and I realized there are hard numbers supporting the power of women coming together. And by the way, there's some amazing organizations. There's what you're doing, Female Founder Collective. There are nonprofits. There's Allraise, and Allraise is working on startups and VCs and trying to create other cohorts. So this idea of having cohorts of people who are at a similar stage as you is something that a lot of companies or organizations, nonprofits also are really getting right now. And then there are these for-profit companies like Chief, which was targeting a very specific kind of women in the VP level. But this idea that all of these things, what you're doing with Female Founder Collective is not just a positive boost, there's a statistically measurable benefit to it. So one of those interesting studies found that men are successful if they have the largest networks, if they know the most people. But for women, knowing the most people does not correlate to success. Yeah. What is helpful for women is having a tight and diverse network of women to help them. And I think that idea of meeting people who are not your friends, you don't want to just go to your friends for advice in work situations because they may not be totally honest with you. And also you don't want to go to someone who let's say you're working with someone, you just can't ask your colleague for advice because they may be too close to you. Their perspective may be too close. So I love this idea of the women who are successful have the most diverse networks. And also there's this amazing data, one of my favorite studies in the whole book, showing that groups of women can defeat the negative impact of bias. to me, that's like the most powerful thing in the world. So bias and stereotypes can have a negative impact on performance. We know that it stings, it hurts to have someone say something stereotyped or to treat you with bias, but it actually can hurt your performance. And there's a study that I'll try to summarize as quick as I can. But there's this study of female engineering college students, and the academics who were doing the study tested like how good they were at math, established like a baseline. Then they told some of them, women are bad at math, women are bad at engineering, and you should and here, take this test. So they told them the stereotype, and they gave them the test. The scores went way down. Bias hurts, right? You don't want to feel like I'm not going to be good at this. Then they put these women into small groups of other women who were also engineers. They got to talk to each other and say like, hey, I'm not the only one. We're all in this together. They told them the stereotype. Women are terrible at math. You're going to do badly on this test, but take it anyways. They gave them the test. The stereotype had no impact.
Wow.
The women did as well, if not better, because they'd just been surrounded by other women like them. So there's like a measurable impact where if you're going to be fighting bias, you want to do it together. You want to do it as a team. So everything that you're doing with 10th house has like such amazing academic science behind it that you're not only teaching these women to help each other and you're enabling them to coach each other through the hardest times, but you're providing them with a network and this understanding that they're not alone when they're doing the hardest stuff.
Yeah. And I was just going to ask about the piece of leverage, right? Like, how do you actually leverage your networks? Did you find there were specific ways in which some of these big leaders knew how to tap into their community? Because one thing that we've found is that a lot of times women are sort of afraid to ask each other, right? For things that are transactional. We even discussed this at the dinner that, it's really women, like to sort of applaud each other, support each other, but then we're not necessarily there going, hey, like you should go get this great deal that's happening. That's $100,000 or doing things or asking somebody, hey, I really need a connection to this person because it's going to help me to build my business. Were there certain ways you found that these female leaders were great at sort of leveraging the power?
100%. You are so right. Women, like there have been academics that have researched this. They have found that men are totally comfortable asking for favors. Totally comfortable. Can you, buddy, do me a favor? Let me do this thing for me. Make this introduction for me. Introduce me to your investor. Men have no qualms about that. Women do not feel good about it. Women are comfortable offering help, but they aren't comfortable asking for help. And one of the studies actually used the word icky. They said women think it's icky to ask for professional help. But what's crazy is that women feel comfortable giving the help, right?
Yeah.
So, but they don't feel comfortable asking for it. So I think that this is so important for us as women to see this and to see that our male cohort, our male colleagues, they have no qualms. They are asking. The professors who did the study called it horse trading. They're really comfortable with horse trading. But but that's why I think professional networks that destigmatize it, that say like what you're doing with Female Founder Collective and 10th House, you're saying you're all here to help each other. Ask each other for what you need. Say, this is what I need. This is what I can offer. And if you create an environment where you make it very clear, you are all here to help each other professionally. And by the way, you will all succeed if you help each other. And this is not a zero-sum game. We've moved past the point where it's a zero-sum game, but you will all succeed if you help each other and just get used to it. Get over the ickiness. I feel it myself. Like I've read dozens of studies on this and I still have a hard time asking people for help. So I know it's hard, but I think it's all about like changing the mindset and understanding that the guys are doing it. We're not going to succeed unless we do it too. And so just really getting to the place where you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone, but get used to asking people for help and also offer something as well. And that'll make them feel comfortable asking for help. And it's all about creating these new relationships. They're not friends. It's okay that they're not friendships. You might be friends with the people, but it's about a new kind of professional friendship where you understand that you're going to help each other and you will both succeed if you help each other.
Yeah, it's not.
By the way, I buy my book. I have to get used to saying people to buy my book.
The other thing that I want to sort of dig into a little bit more is that bias that you talked about, and specific to venture capital, because a lot of the people that are listening in have gone out to raise capital. They've maybe raised capital and they found it to be just tremendously challenging, and a lot more challenging, especially as it relates to their sort of male counterparts. So I wanted to see if you could speak to any of the biases that you found present specifically in venture capital, and what those stats look like, and maybe some of the women that have defied that, and if there was any sort of commonality or pattern you saw with why.
Yes. And I think, you know what, the key thing about how they were able to defy it, part of it is really related to understanding that what to expect and being prepared for bias. And I think just sort of like knowing what you're up against really helps you manage any challenges. So the stats are crazy, terrible. I mentioned the 2% stat for women of color. It's much worse. The last data I've seen on women of color for Black women, I believe it was 0.27% of all venture capital funding. And the last year, I think that was counted was 2020, 2021. So I think women are in a terrible position when it comes to raising venture capital. Interestingly, men and women raise at the same rate once they get to the C stage. And that's because once you get to the C stage, companies have revenue, they have profits, they have a proven track record, and the numbers speak for themselves. Before that, investors are betting on the entrepreneur, the person, and also on the idea. And that's when the investors tend to be stuck in what they call pattern matching. They're looking for someone who reminds them of Mark Zuckerberg. They're looking for the next Jeff Bezos. And there just aren't that many patterns of successful women for these men to be thinking about when they're making their investment decisions. So I think that's sort of what women are up against. And that's actually why I wanted to write this book, because I was like, there are other patterns of successful women. Let's tell those, let's share those patterns, and let's get people used to this idea of seeing other kinds of successful CEOs. And that's these like very diverse women in this book. So I think one strategy that I've seen been really helpful is understanding that women are up against a lot of bias when they walk in the door. And there's one study that finds that women, when they're pitching a company, are more likely to be asked about the downside risk. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, if the economy struggles, like, how bad could it be for your company? So they're asked to like be like talking about the worst case scenario. When men walk into the room to give a pitch, they're asked about the upside potential. What's the best case scenario? How big could this possibly be someday? And that's a terrible position for women to be in. All of a sudden they're like, well,
defense, always.
Yeah, I'm playing defense, totally.
Yeah.
But if you know that that's going to happen, you can walk into the room and say, well, this is short answer to the worst case scenario, but upside, let me tell you about the upside. So I think being prepared to pivot very quickly and answer the question that the men are being asked is going to put you in a better situation. So I think it's all about being prepared.
And by the way, we spoke about this briefly too the other night, where there's actually been a lot of statistics that have shown that female founders outperform men. So First Round actually
100%.
did a study of the first 10 years. It was 300 different founders that they were looking at, actually 600 total founders, 300 companies. And they actually found that women outperformed their male counterparts by 63%. Like, it wasn't even close. It wasn't like 10%, it was 63. And I think part of that is because women are used to protecting for the downside, right? They're used to having access to capital. They're used to having to, show proof that they have a great business model that works, that's profitable. And so they're able to actually go out there and do more with less.
Yes, women are absolutely better equipped to doing more with less, but talking about the downside risk puts women at a disadvantage. So it's like, the question is like, so I think that's a superpower to be able to do more with less, but you need to make sure you're on an even playing field when you're pitching to raise the money, right? And that's where like understanding how people are biased against you, or you may not fit into some pattern that they've seen before, just enables you to be more prepared and go in there and say, so this is comparable to this company that you invested in 2 years ago, or we're not an enterprise software company doing, what you've invested in the past, but here's how we think our growth rates can be similar. So I think it's all about like speaking to the male investors in the language that they feel comfortable with,
that they're used to. Yeah, that's a great point. The other thing that we've actually found a lot of, and I was watching an interview you did with Elise Lonin about confidence, right? And something that I think holds women back when it comes to venture capital is that confidence, right? You've actually seen that it pays off to sort of turn it up and down. Can you talk about that finding and sort of the nuances of it?
Totally. So I think the main thing is that women tend to be, female leaders in particular, tend to be less confident than they should be. Female employees rank their female leaders as being more effective than the female leaders rank themselves. Employees rank their male leaders as being less effective than the male leaders rank themselves. So I'll leave that there. So, but I think that's a really important thing to remember. You're probably doing a better job than you think you are based on what other people think about you. But this idea that, when I was growing up and a young reporter covering all these male CEOs, everyone was confident all the time, even in terrible situations, confident. People didn't admit they didn't know things. That was like a major sign of weakness. Yeah. And I've come to believe and to see in the studies and in hundreds of interviews that when you acknowledge that you're not confident, that unlocks the potential for massive success. Because if you can turn down, like, let's say you're feeling unconfident, that's a sign you need to go do your homework and you need to gather information. You are not going to be able to learn from other people if you're overly confident. But if you can dial down the confidence and then gather information from across your company, from people who are tangentially related, just like have humility, say, I'm going to learn from everyone right now. Then you can use that information and really absorb it in the most humble and open-minded way. Then once you make your decision, you're like, okay, I've got this. I did my homework. I talked to everyone. I built back up my confidence. And then with all that information that you gathered, you can go turn up your confidence to execute and to communicate what you're doing in a very confident way. So confidence is important, especially when you're communicating your plan, but you're going to benefit if you're not confident all the time.
Yeah. It also seems like a part of that is women's ability to be vulnerable and listen, I think, more than men. Have you found things in the book that sort of speak to those attributes?
Yes. So vulnerability is absolutely a superpower. And I think that humility is a big part of that. And there are amazing studies and amazing stories about how vulnerability invites collaboration. So Katrina Lake, who founded Stitch Fix, everyone was telling me that she was a talent magnet, right? They kept on using this word talent magnet. I was like, that sounds amazing. Like everyone would want to be a talent magnet. How did you do it? I kept on interviewing her. I was like trying to get to it. And she and everyone around her, all of her investors, couldn't explain to me how she became a talent magnet. So I was like, but so wait, you hired the head of algorithms from Netflix. You hired the COO of Walmart.com, and you had a very teeny tiny company at the time. Like, tell me how you did this. And she said, I contacted them on LinkedIn and I said, I don't know anything about algorithms. Can you help me? And she said, nobody wants to work for a know-it-all.
Yeah.
And I was totally humble, and I was inviting them to take the lead in the area where they had strength. And this idea that people want to be valued. And if you admit what you don't know, people are going to want to partner with you and know that you're going to empower them to take the lead on their thing. And so, I mean, it's like funny because like there was nothing magic to her being a talent magnet. It was like ridiculously simple about her admitting what she didn't know and wanting people to be their own leaders in their own way.
So I know you have to be on TV soon, so I want to wrap this. And this has just been such a phenomenal discussion. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about it.
We have to do it again. I want to keep talking.
More. Because I mean, all of these findings are so relevant for the women that are leading these companies, that are fighting every single day to keep them alive and to thrive and to defeat bias, frankly. But my question for you is, in addition to these women that can then go read your book and take this data and help use it to lead their own companies and to defy the odds, who else do you think this is for? And how do we use this book to basically help get us to parity more quickly?
So I think what your community, what you are doing is the hardest thing, but maybe the most important thing. Talking to women this week, I don't think women are going to rise through the ranks enough at traditional companies fast enough to get to parity in a long, long time. Entrepreneurs have an opportunity to change things much more quickly and to start your own thing. So I think that what you and your community are doing is incredibly important for all of us. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I want you all to succeed because I want more power and more money to shift into the hands of women, period. I think it's really, really important. I actually think, though, that the lessons from female founders, because they have had to defy such odds, are really valuable for everyone. I want men to read this book so they understand what is going on in our world. And I also want women who are moms and not working. I want women who are at companies, who are just trying to succeed in their workplace. I want them to read this book because I think it helps, educate them on the world that we have to navigate so they can push through any bias, but B, to give them a kind of a roadmap of understanding that women, diverse women, are the new model for leadership. And we need to break free from our expectations and our assumptions of what leaders look like and start changing our perception and creating these new patterns of women being the new archetype of leadership. And all of those things we talked about, vulnerability, empathy, those are the superpowers we need right now.
Oh, love it. Vulnerability, empathy, women, keep going, create the future, change things. I very much agree with you. I mean, this is a big part of why we created Female Founder Collective, because I think the founders are the ones that can achieve it more quickly. So go out there. Thank you all for doing what you do. And thank you, Julia, for writing this.
Thank you. I hope you find it interesting and valuable. I think you're doing really important work. And read When Women Lead. Tell your friends about it. We're trying to grow momentum.
Love it. Thank you so much. Good luck today. So great chatting and more to come.
Thank you so much. Would love to talk to you again soon.